The palace had never felt so quiet. Not because people stopped moving, because everyone was whispering. Servants whispered in hallways. Guards whispered at their posts. Even the royal council lowered their voices whenever they spoke. The reason was simple. Luna Rosalie Everwin was gone. Not kidnapped, not missing, gone. 3 days earlier, she had calmly informed the palace steward that she would be leaving. Then she packed her belongings, surrendered her royal seal, returned every ceremonial jewel, and disappeared before sunrise. No arguments, no dramatic farewell, no explanation, just absence. Alpha King Lucian Ashcroft stood in the doorway of the Luna Wing. For a long moment, he didn't move. The rooms felt wrong. Not empty, wrong. As though someone had removed something essential from the air itself. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Fresh flowers still sat on a nearby table. A blanket remained folded neatly across a reading chair. Everything appeared untouched. Yet somehow the life inside the rooms had vanished. Lucian walked slowly through the suite. The silence followed him. For 8 years, Rosalie had lived here. 8 years of routines, conversations, laughter, memories. Now only traces remained. The realization unsettled him more than he expected. At the far end of the sitting room, a window overlooked the palace gardens. Rosalie loved that view. She often sat there reading during quiet afternoons. The image arrived unexpectedly, clear enough to hurt. Lucian frowned, then immediately dismissed the thought. His attention shifted toward a small book resting beneath the window seat. A journal, leather-bound, worn from use, probably forgotten during the move. Without thinking, he picked it up. The moment he lifted it, something slipped free. A folded sheet of paper drifted onto the floor. Lucian bent to retrieve it, then paused. His name appeared in the middle of the page, not at the beginning, not as a greeting, simply mentioned within the text. Curiosity stirred immediately. He shouldn't read it. The conclusion felt obvious. Private correspondence remained private, even for kings, especially for kings. Yet his fingers tightened around the paper, because one detail bothered him. The letter wasn't addressed to him. A different name appeared at the top. Elena, one of Rosalie's childhood friends. The realization should have made the decision easier. Instead, it made it impossible, because if Rosalie never intended him to see these words, then whatever was written inside was probably honest. Dangerously honest. Lucian stared at the folded page, then unfolded it. Just one sentence. That was all he intended to read. One sentence, nothing more. His eyes moved across the page and immediately stopped. The first line read, "I think the hardest part is that he isn't cruel." The air left his lungs, slowly, painfully, because somehow, before reading another word, Lucian already knew this letter was about him. And for the first time since Rosalie disappeared, he found himself wishing he had left something unread. 8 years earlier, the kingdom stood on the edge of collapse. Not because of war, because of division. Several powerful territories threatened to break away from the crown. Trade routes became unstable. Noble houses argued openly. Old alliances weakened. Every council meeting seemed to produce more problems than solutions. The kingdom needed stability, fast, and stability usually arrived in the form of marriage. Unfortunately for Alpha King Lucian Ashcroft, he already knew exactly who the council would suggest. Rosalie Everwin, daughter of the North, heir to the largest territory in the kingdom. Beloved by her people, respected by nobles, impossible to ignore. The alliance made perfect political sense, which was precisely why Lucian hated it. Not because he disliked Rosalie. The opposite, actually. He respected her, admired her intelligence, trusted her judgment. The problem was simpler. He didn't love her. Marriage felt permanent, too important to enter without certainty. The council disagreed. The kingdom couldn't afford hesitation. Eventually, Lucian accepted reality. And so did Rosalie. The engagement announcement transformed the capital overnight. Celebrations filled the streets. Merchants sold commemorative ribbons. Newspapers praised the match. The kingdom rejoiced. Only two people understood the uncomfortable truth: the bride and groom. One autumn evening before the wedding, Lucian met Rosalie in the palace gardens. The sunset painted the sky gold. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Lucian broke the silence. "You know why we're doing this?" Rosalie smiled faintly. "To prevent civil unrest?" The answer carried gentle amusement. Lucian didn't smile. "I'm serious." "So am I." She looked toward the horizon. "The kingdom needs peace." The conversation should have ended there. Instead, guilt settled heavily inside him. Because Rosalie deserved honesty, even if it hurt. "I don't know if I can give you what you deserve." The words felt awkward, insufficient, yet necessary. Rosalie looked at him quietly, then nodded. "I know." The answer stunned him. Not because she sounded angry, because she didn't. There was no bitterness, no disappointment, only understanding. A dangerous kind of understanding. One that expected very little. "I know you don't love me." Silence. The truth hung between them. Uncomfortable, unavoidable. Rosalie continued softly. "Love isn't something people can demand." Lucian didn't know what to say. For the first time, he wished she would be angry. Anger felt easier. Instead, she smiled. Small, hopeful. "I think people can build something, though." The words stayed with him long after the conversation ended, because she genuinely believed it. Believed that affection could grow, that companionship could deepen, that time might create what duty could not. And for years, she tried. She remembered birthdays, celebrated victories, supported him through every crisis, protected his reputation, strengthened his reign, held the marriage together through patience alone. Meanwhile, Lucian slowly grew comfortable. Comfortable with her loyalty, comfortable with her presence, comfortable with the idea that she would always remain. And that was the problem, because while Rosalie spent 8 years building a marriage, he spent 8 years assuming it would never fall apart. Lucian told himself he would stop reading. He didn't. The letter rested in his hands. The paper felt fragile, dangerously fragile, as though the truth written across it might tear if handled carelessly. For several moments, he stared at the first sentence. "I think the hardest part is that he isn't cruel." The words refused to leave his mind, because they were true. He wasn't cruel. At least he never intended to be. He never shouted at Rosalie. Never insulted her, never humiliated her. He treated her with respect, kindness, courtesy, and somehow that made the next lines even harder to read. Cruelty would be easier. Lucian sat down slowly on the window seat. Outside, the palace gardens stretched beneath the afternoon sun. Inside, the world seemed to narrow around the page. If he hated me, I could leave angry. If he mistreated me, I could blame him. But he is kind, polite, respectful. The words blurred briefly. Lucian blinked, then continued. And somehow, that hurts more. Silence filled the empty Luna wing. A terrible silence, because for the first time, he understood what Rosalie had endured. Not abuse, not cruelty. Something quieter. Loneliness. The kind that lived inside ordinary days, inside polite conversations, inside a marriage where one person loved more than the other. His chest tightened. Still, he kept reading, because stopping felt impossible now. People talk about heartbreak, as though it arrives all at once. The handwriting remained neat, careful, controlled, the handwriting of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. I think they're wrong. Real heartbreak happens slowly. The next line hit him harder than expected. It happens every time you realize someone doesn't look for you the way you look for them. Lucian lowered the letter briefly. Memories surfaced immediately. Rosalie waiting after council meetings. Rosalie attending state functions beside him. Rosalie sitting across from him at dinner. Always present, always smiling, always seeming fine. He swallowed, then forced himself to continue. It happens when they forget things you remember, when they stop noticing what makes you happy, when you become part of their life without becoming part of their heart. The room felt smaller, harder to breathe in. Lucian looked around the abandoned chamber, the reading chair, the bookshelves, the flowers she always kept fresh. How many signs had he missed? How many opportunities? How many conversations ended before they began? The answer frightened him. Probably too many. The letter continued. Not angry, not bitter. That somehow made everything worse. Rosalie wasn't writing to punish him. She wasn't writing for him at all. These words existed because she believed nobody would ever read them, which meant every sentence carried the weight of truth. No performance, no diplomacy, no masks, just honesty, painfully honest. Then Lucian reached a paragraph that made his stomach drop. A single confession. Simple, heartbreaking, impossible to forget. For years, I kept waiting for him to love me back. His hands tightened around the paper, because even before reading the next line, he already knew it would destroy him. And unfortunately, he was right. Lucian didn't sleep that night, or the night after. The letter followed him everywhere, into council meetings, through palace corridors, across long hours spent staring at reports he couldn't remember reading. Each sentence replayed endlessly inside his head. For years, I kept waiting for him to love me back. The words lingered like a wound, because no matter how many times he read them, they never became easier. Eventually, Lucian stopped rereading the letter, not because he wanted to, because the palace itself started supplying new evidence. Everywhere he looked, Rosalie seemed to appear, not physically, in traces, reminders, proof. The discoveries began innocently enough. One morning, a servant asked whether the Luna would still be organizing the spring charity banquet. The question confused him. Rosalie handled that? The servant blinked, then slowly nodded. Every year, Your Majesty. Another discovery followed. Then another, and another. The kingdom seemed determined to reveal how little he actually knew about his own reign. The Northern Trade Agreement that saved millions in taxes. Rosalie negotiated the final compromise. The dispute between two noble houses that never reached the council. Rosalie resolved it quietly. The scholarship program helping hundreds of children attend school. Rosalie created it. The pattern repeated everywhere. Problems disappeared because Rosalie solved them before they reached him. Conflicts ended because Rosalie intervened first. Crises never happened because Rosalie prevented them. And somehow, she accomplished all of it so efficiently that nobody noticed, especially him. That realization hurt a lot. Then came the birthdays, the anniversaries, the personal things. The palace steward revealed that Rosalie personally selected every gift Lucian ever received from foreign dignitaries because she remembered what he liked. The head chef admitted that Rosalie quietly adjusted royal menus during difficult weeks because she knew which meals helped him relax. Even his favorite winter coat existed because Rosalie noticed he complained about the cold once. The discoveries became unbearable, not because Rosalie did those things, because he never noticed. He simply accepted them, expected them, assumed they happened naturally, as though thoughtful gestures appeared from nowhere, as though care required no effort. One evening, Lucian found himself back inside the abandoned Luna Wing. The letter rested on the same window seat where he first discovered it. Slowly, he unfolded the remaining pages. His pulse quickened, because he wasn't ready, yet he needed to know. The final section began differently. The handwriting remained neat, but something had changed. The sadness felt quieter, stronger, like someone reaching a decision. Lucian forced himself to continue, and immediately realized these weren't pages about heartbreak. They were pages about freedom. Rosalie wrote about exhaustion, about waiting, about slowly disappearing inside a life that no longer felt like her own. Then came the sentence that stopped him cold. I didn't leave because I stopped loving him. The room went silent. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, because suddenly he understood. The reason she left was far worse than anger, far worse than resentment. Rosalie hadn't walked away because she loved him less. She walked away because she finally learned how to love herself more. Lucian stared at the final pages for a long time. The words never changed, no matter how many times he read them, no matter how desperately he wished they would. I didn't leave because I stopped loving him. The sentence alone hurt enough. The next one was worse. I left because I finally stopped leaving myself. Silence filled the Luna Wing, heavy, unforgiving, because suddenly Rosalie's departure made perfect sense. Not as an act of anger, not as revenge, as survival. For years, she had sacrificed pieces of herself while waiting for something to change, waiting for affection to grow, waiting for effort to be returned, waiting for love to arrive. Eventually, she realized she was the only person still waiting. The letter continued. Each line felt like a quiet confession, the kind people only make when they believe nobody else will ever hear it. I kept telling myself one more year, one more season, one more chance. Lucian closed his eyes briefly because he recognized the pattern. Hope, the dangerous kind, the kind that convinced people to endure loneliness because tomorrow might be different. Rosalie had spent years living inside tomorrow until she finally chose today instead. The final paragraph was short, painfully short. I don't regret loving him. The words blurred slightly. Lucian forced himself to continue. I regret forgetting that I deserved to be loved too. The letter ended there. No dramatic farewell, no accusations, no demands, nothing except truth. For several minutes, Lucian remained motionless. The pages rested in his lap. The room around him felt strangely distant, because for the first time, he understood something terrifying. Rosalie hadn't left, hoping he would chase her. She hadn't left to teach him a lesson. She hadn't left expecting him to change. She left because she genuinely believed her future no longer belonged in the palace. The realization shattered whatever illusions remained. For the next several weeks, Lucian searched anyway. At first, the effort felt practical, reasonable. He needed answers, closure, something. Then the weeks became months. The search expanded. Messengers traveled across the kingdom. Officials investigated every lead. Reports arrived constantly. Most led nowhere. Rosalie seemed to have vanished completely. The irony wasn't lost on him. For 8 years, she lived beside him. Now he couldn't find her at all. The seasons changed. Spring became summer. Summer became autumn. Still nothing. The council grew concerned. The kingdom moved forward. Life continued. Yet Lucian remained trapped by a single question. Where was she? Nearly a year after her disappearance, the answer finally arrived. A merchant from the southern coast mentioned a woman, intelligent, kind, respected by everyone in town. The description sounded familiar, dangerously familiar. The merchant laughed while telling the story. Apparently, the woman had transformed half the community simply by showing up. Businesses thrived. Charities expanded. People trusted her. The details struck Lucian like lightning, because they sounded exactly like Rosalie. The same Rosalie he never fully appreciated. The same Rosalie who had quietly improved every place she touched. For the first time in months, hope returned. Not the hopeful certainty of finding his wife. Something smaller, more fragile. The possibility that she wasn't lost. Only living somewhere he had never thought to look. The town wasn't difficult to find. Finding the courage to enter it proved far harder. Lucian arrived just after sunrise. The coastal village sat beside a wide harbor where fishing boats drifted across calm, blue water. Seabirds circled overhead. Salt lingered in the air. The entire place felt peaceful, comfortable, alive. Nothing like the royal capital. For several minutes, Lucian remained on horseback, overlooking the town. A strange nervousness settled in his chest, because after nearly a year of searching, he was finally here, and suddenly, he wasn't certain what he wanted to find. Eventually, he dismounted. The villagers barely glanced at him. Travelers passed through regularly. No one recognized their king beneath a simple cloak. For once, Lucian appreciated the anonymity. He spent the morning walking through the harbor district, listening, observing, and slowly he began hearing Rosalie's name, not as royalty, not as a former Luna, simply as Rosalie. Ask Rosalie. Rosalie will know. Rosalie helped us. The pattern repeated everywhere. A fisherman mentioned that she organized support for families after a terrible storm. A shopkeeper praised her for helping struggling businesses cooperate instead of compete. An elderly woman claimed Rosalie visited every sick resident personally during a difficult winter. The stories sounded familiar, painfully familiar, because they were exactly the kinds of things Rosalie had always done. The only difference was that people noticed now. Around midday, Lucian finally saw her. She stood near a marketplace stall, speaking with a group of villagers. The sight stopped him completely. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow. Rosalie looked different, not physically. She was still Rosalie, still graceful, still beautiful. The difference was harder to describe. She looked lighter, as though some invisible weight had disappeared. The realization hurt more than he expected. Then she laughed. A real laugh, bright, unrestrained. The sound carried easily across the marketplace. Lucian froze, because he couldn't remember the last time he heard her laugh like that. Not in the palace, not during their marriage, not once. The thought lodged itself firmly inside his chest. Rosalie continued talking with the villagers. Children ran toward her. She greeted each one by name. A merchant handed her a basket of fresh bread. Someone else waved from across the street. Every interaction looked natural, effortless, as though she belonged here. And perhaps she did. For the first time, Lucian found himself wondering something he never considered before. What if Rosalie wasn't waiting to be found? The possibility felt unsettling, because throughout the search, he assumed the story had an obvious ending. Find Rosalie, bring her home, fix what was broken, simple. Now, watching her smile beneath the coastal sunlight, he wasn't so sure. She looked happy, genuinely happy, not surviving, not enduring, thriving. The realization forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. Maybe Rosalie's best life hadn't started after she married him. Maybe it started after she left, and standing in the middle of a town that clearly adored her, Lucien wondered whether the woman he came to find had already found everything she needed, except him. Lucien waited until sunset, not because he lacked opportunities to approach her, because he needed time to process what he had seen, time to accept that Rosalie wasn't surviving without him. She was flourishing. The realization remained difficult, necessary, but difficult. As evening settled over the harbor, the town grew quieter. Fishing boats returned. Merchants closed their stalls. The sky melted into shades of gold and amber. Rosalie stood near the water's edge, watching the waves. For a moment, Lucien simply looked at her. The sea breeze lifted strands of her hair. The setting sun painted everything in warm light. She seemed peaceful. The sight felt both comforting and painful. Finally, he stepped forward. The sound of his footsteps drew her attention. Rosalie turned and froze. For one brief second, neither moved, neither spoke. The years between them suddenly felt very small, then very large. Lucien, his name left her lips softly, almost disbelieving. He nodded. "Hello, Rosalie." The greeting sounded absurdly normal, considering the circumstances. She laughed once, a short, startled laugh, as though she thought the same thing. Silence followed, not hostile, just uncertain. Eventually, Lucien reached into his coat. Rosalie's eyes immediately narrowed, then widened, because she recognized the folded paper. Instantly. The letter. Her letter. The color drained from her face. "Oh no!" Lucien winced. The reaction somehow made everything worse. Rosalie covered her eyes with one hand, mortified, completely mortified. "You read that?" The answer felt unnecessary. The letter in his hand already provided it. Still, he nodded. A long silence followed. The harbor suddenly seemed very interested in minding its own business. Rosalie slowly lowered her hand. "I cannot believe you read that." The embarrassment in her voice almost sounded genuine enough to be funny. Almost. Unfortunately, too much history sat between them. Finally, Lucien looked down at the pages, then back at her. "I wasn't supposed to." "No." The answer arrived immediately. "You absolutely were not." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The reaction surprised both of them. Then the smile disappeared, because the important question still remained. Lucien held up the letter slightly. His voice grew quieter. "Was it true?" The words settled heavily between them. Rosalie's expression softened immediately. The embarrassment faded, replaced by something older, sadder, more honest. She stared toward the ocean for a moment, then laughed softly. Not because anything was amusing, because denial would be pointless now. Every word. The answer hit exactly as hard as he expected. Maybe harder. Neither spoke for several seconds. The waves rolled gently against the harbor docks. The sunset continued fading. Eventually, Rosalie looked at him again. Curious, thoughtful. "What did you expect to find?" The question caught him off guard, because he hadn't considered it. At least, not consciously. Lucien stared at the letter. The worn paper, the careful handwriting, the years hidden between every sentence. Then he answered honestly, "I don't know." But even as the words left his mouth, he realized they weren't entirely true, because deep down, he had expected anger, resentment, blame, something easier to carry. Instead, he found love. Years and years of it, patient, quiet, unreturned. And somehow that hurt far more than hatred ever could. The harbor grew quieter as night approached. Lanterns flickered to life along the docks. The last fishing boats returned home. Still, neither Lucian nor Rosalie moved. Too much remained unsaid. Too many years sat between them. The letter rested in Lucian's hands. A few pages of paper. Nothing more. Yet somehow it carried the weight of an entire marriage. Finally, Lucian spoke. "I'm sorry." The words sounded inadequate immediately. Rosalie smiled faintly. Not mocking, not bitter, just tired. "I know." The answer surprised him. Because forgiveness wasn't what he expected. Neither was understanding. Yet somehow, both existed. Lucian looked toward the darkening sea, searching for the right words, finding only truth. "I didn't realize." Rosalie laughed softly. The sound carried no cruelty, only sadness. "That's kind of the problem." He nodded, because she was right. The entire tragedy fit inside those 4 words. He didn't realize, not when she waited for him after late council meetings, not when she remembered every important date, not when she carried responsibilities he never noticed, not when she slowly became lonelier, standing beside him, than she ever would have been standing alone. He didn't realize, and by the time he did, she was gone. The realization settled heavily between them. Eventually, Rosalie leaned against the harbor railing. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the docks. Beautiful, unreachable. "I spent years hoping things would change." Her voice remained calm, steady, the kind of steadiness that only arrived after surviving disappointment. "I kept telling myself you just needed more time." Lucian closed his eyes briefly, because he remembered those years. The wars, the negotiations, the endless responsibilities, all legitimate, all important, none of them excuses. Rosalie continued, "I don't think you ever meant to hurt me." The statement should have comforted him. Instead, it hurt, because intent changed nothing. The loneliness happened anyway. The waiting happened anyway. The damage happened anyway. After a long silence, Lucian finally asked the question haunting him since he arrived. "Do you still love me?" The words escaped before he could stop them. Rosalie blinked, clearly surprised. Then she smiled, a small, thoughtful smile. The answer took time, not because she didn't know, because she wanted to be honest. Finally, she nodded. "A part of me probably always will." Hope stirred immediately. Dangerous hope. Then Rosalie continued, "But that isn't enough anymore." The hope vanished. Not cruelly, gently, like a wave pulling away from shore. "I spent too many years waiting for someone else to choose me." Her gaze met his. Steady, certain. "I choose myself now." The words carried no anger, no accusation, only confidence, and somehow that made them beautiful. Lucian looked down at the letter. The same letter that led him here. The same letter that finally showed him what he had refused to see. For the first time, he truly understood. Love wasn't the issue. Rosalie loved him. Perhaps she always would. The issue was that she had finally learned her worth. And once someone learned that lesson, they could never unknow it. The future suddenly felt uncertain. Not hopeless, just uncertain. For the first time in years, Lucian had no title, authority, or obligation to hide behind. Only choices, and whether those choices would be enough remained to be seen. Years later, historians would tell the story incorrectly. They always did. According to the most popular version, a forgotten letter made an alpha king fall in love with his wife. It was a beautiful story, romantic, poetic, completely wrong. The letter didn't create love. It revealed something that had been there all along, something Lucian failed to recognize until it was nearly too late. The distinction mattered, at least to him. The kingdom changed considerably after Rosalie left, not because she intended to change it, because her absence exposed things nobody had noticed before. Programs she quietly managed, problems she solved before they reached the throne, communities she supported. One by one, people began understanding how much she had contributed. The realization spread slowly, then all at once. Meanwhile, Lucian changed too. Not immediately. Growth rarely worked that way. Instead, it happened through hundreds of small decisions. He listened more carefully, paid closer attention, asked questions he once ignored. Most importantly, he stopped assuming that love could survive indefinitely without effort. The lesson arrived painfully, but it arrived. As for Rosalie, she remained beside the sea. The town continued thriving. Businesses expanded. Families flourished. Children grew up hearing stories about the kind woman who helped everyone. The life she built became something entirely her own. And for perhaps the first time, that mattered more than any title ever had. People often asked whether she and Lucian found their way back to each other. The answer depended on who told the story. Some insisted they did. Others insisted they didn't. The truth remained private, exactly where both of them preferred it, because the most important part wasn't whether they reunited. It was what they learned. One summer evening, years after finding the letter, Lucian stood alone in his study. The pages rested inside a wooden box, carefully preserved, not because they were a treasure, because they were a reminder of what happened when people stopped paying attention, a reminder that kindness alone wasn't enough, respect alone wasn't enough. Love required presence, effort, choice, every day. He unfolded the first page one final time. The handwriting remained familiar. The words remained painful, yet they no longer felt like punishment. They felt like truth, the kind that changes people if they're willing to listen. A faint smile touched his face. Then he returned the letter to its box. Outside the palace windows, the kingdom carried on. Seasons changed. Lives continued. The future remained unwritten, just as it should. And perhaps that was the real lesson hidden inside a letter never meant to be read. The right person shouldn't need a secret letter to understand your worth. And if they do, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop writing letters they'll never read, even if years later they finally do. Because by then, your happiness should no longer depend on whether they understand, only on whether you finally do.